What was the process of writing all the scripts? How long did that take? And who's all on the writing team?
It's just me. At least for season one, it was
Oh,
just me, which is
wow.
which was so
Wow.
intimidating. There's a lot to get right and a lot that you can get wrong. It took me about 3 months to write the new episodes. So we'd already done the pilot, right? I wrote the pilot in probably about 2 weeks. Once I reread that story about Jethro, it kind of really, it's not, I don't think over spiritualizing it to say that it felt like God just put it on my heart. I was like, okay,
Hmm.
let me try it. Let me just see if I can do this, get it right, all that. And then when we were preparing for season one, I knew I had to write 5 more episodes to finish out the season. And it took me about 3 months. A lot of that was preparation. I'd kind of had a loose outline of what I would do in season one, but originally it was going to be longer. Like we were thinking about doing a 10 episode first season, which would have been too expensive, but also it would have had a different stopping place. And I
Mm.
really, you'll see in season one, small spoilers, but I think it's okay. We basically go to the end of Exodus in season one. So we go to when the tabernacle has been built. And for me, at the moment the tabernacle is finished, I was like, that feels like our finale for season one. And if you only get
Yeah.
one season, I hope it's a good one. But so I wanted to feel like, it could end here. It hopefully is not going to end here, right? But if you're going to end somewhere, let's end on this kind of moment of holiness and celebration that happens once they've built the tabernacle. Anyway, so I knew those were kind of my parameters. And so then it was a matter of going through and saying, okay, what is our focus, right? Our focus in season one is on the leadership, right? It's taking what we learned from Jethro and going through how does it work to lead the nation when you're not doing it yourself, when Aaron is also in charge and Miriam is in charge, and Moses appoints chiefs and elders to help him lead the nation as well. And so kind of all of the decisions were like, what are the stories in between here? I don't want to miss anything. My hope with the show is that I literally capture more or less every story. Even if they're really small, really big, whatever they are, I want to capture most of them, whatever kind of feels like it makes sense and fits into the show. And so I was trying to look at all those and connect them through that through line of leadership. And it was honestly a lot of fun. It was cool to be able to go back and rewrite for these characters, having done the pilot.
Hmm.
And, I can write and hear their voices. And I'm like, okay, this is what Joshua sounds like. This is what Korah sounds like. And Jasisi and all these different characters. I'm writing with kind of their performance in mind. And it was a very, honestly, fulfilling experience doing the writing of season one.
Will each episode have a lesson pertaining to leadership or
That's a good question. I don't know that each lesson is, or sorry, each episode is quite lesson driven. I think it's a little bit more, every episode has a moment of heart in it.
mm,
Some of them are lessons. Some of them are people learning something. Some of them are characters who are growing. Some of them are moments of failure or moments of
mm,
fear. So some of them, it's not quite as direct as being a lesson, though that's a great insight into what this is. Sometimes it's a little bit more like we're on a journey with these people, and sometimes
mm.
they fail, and sometimes it kind of hurts for a minute.
Relatability?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
sometimes that moment of failure is not even something that they did wrong. It's just like, man, I was hoping this would work out and it just didn't. You know what I mean? And so that
Yeah.
sometimes that's there I'm sure there are lessons in that, but mostly we're just kind of they all kind of have a moment where it's like, and then it gets, they overcome or they come through it or they, try to resolve it by the next one, I guess.
Well, you said you were doing it for 3 months. You were writing the story for 3 months. Is that
Yeah,
correct? Was that, oh, I'm going to a log cabin? Or is that like I
I
wrote that
wish.
in the evenings after I did The Chosen?
No, yeah, I certainly have done that. There's actually a movie coming out in February called Still Hope
Hmm.
that I co-wrote the script of that. I kind of came on to do rewrites of it before they filmed. That one I did all the writing of while I was on set on The Chosen. I was
Oh my
coming
goodness.
home or on the weekends and I was like, just trying my best to, and it's a totally different movie. It's not a funny movie. It's a very serious kind of beautiful story. But anyways, yeah, I did that while I was on set. No, thankfully for the Promised Land, I was able to do all the writing in a gap. It was, I just finished a project and The Chosen had not started back up again this would have been going into season five. And so from January to March, and I went to The Chosen at the end of March, I got a chance to just kind of sit at home and write, which is great. And so I'm writing like in our room, in the living room. I'd go out and sit in like a coffee shop or whatever. Honestly, I think I've done most of the writing of this show in Starbucks just in a corner somewhere, just talking to myself because I'm saying all the dialogue as I'm writing it. Just looking like a crazy person. If you ever are at a Starbucks, there's a good chance you might see me in a corner just like, "Oh, Moses, how old are you today?" Just doing all these silly characters.
Many people have tried mockumentaries with no success, almost like they're trying to replicate The Office.
Right.
What makes The Promised Land different from that? And I guess my question is, how is it that The Promised Land has become, in my eyes, so successful than all the other mockumentaries?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think one important thing is that we are not a one-to-one like rip of The Office, right? Like
Mhm.
I'm not trying to take biblical characters and cram them into
Yeah,
pre-existing characters from other shows, right? Like I'm not trying to be like, oh, like to me Moses is not Michael Scott. Like I'm not trying to
right.
draw that comparison. Moses is Moses, you know. He just happens
Mhm.
to be in this documentary world. I think what a lot of people get wrong when they're trying to make a mockumentary is that they do try to invoke those other shows. They're like, oh, I need to have a Dwight. I need to have a
Mm.
Jim and Pam romance. I need to have all these kinds of things. We don't have that. We don't have a romance in our show. It doesn't really make sense at the moment for our show because all the characters are older and married. And
Yeah,
so it's like, okay, well, that's not really the type of show that we're doing. It's really just that we're taking that element of the form of The Office, not the writing of The Office. It's that form of we're with a camera crew trying to capture everything that's happening in the moment. We shoot it in a way that tries to make it feel like it was captured live, because that's
yeah,
what these shows feel like. But
right.
I'm not trying to be The Office with a biblical skin on it. And I think that's what a lot of people miss
Mm.
is they're trying to be too close, I think, to those other shows. If anything, we teeter on being too far from them. There are times in the shooting of this show where, you set up a shot, you're like, man, it looks great. And you're like, it shouldn't look great. You know what I mean? Like we got to make this feel more like a mockumentary. You know what I mean? It needs to feel a little looser. And I'm always telling the camera guys, like, you got to settle into it as if you just got there. You know what I mean? It needs to, if we miss focus for a second, great. If anything, we teeter a little bit closer to narrative, but I try to fight that to get us
Yeah.
back into the right space.
Is that hard combining the slapsticky, the office type of comedy with the heart? What's the process of combining those two kind of different type of vibes?
Yeah, it's actually not as hard as it probably sounds because I think what really makes the show work is we are grounding the show in reality, right? The goal of our production design, of how we cast, of how I write, all of it is leading to trying to make a world that feels real and full and like these are real people that existed. And that's what makes it work as a documentary, right? The documentary aspect of the show wouldn't work if you didn't believe the characters. If it didn't feel like real people in a real situation, you wouldn't buy it, right? So the comedy really comes from getting to know the characters and seeing their idiosyncrasies clash, seeing the situational aspects, the relational aspects create this conflict that's usually very funny, right?
Mm.
But because we are grounded in reality and we're character driven, when the characters are going through something that hurts, or they're going through something that is going to grow them, or they're going through something that, at the moment they don't understand it, but they're trying their best to get through it, right?
Hmm.
Because we're based around how they are feeling. When they are feeling something that hurts, the show is not like, haha, look, Moses is having a bad day. It's mostly
Yeah.
like, yeah, I've been there.
Yeah.
Because in that sense of the perspective of our show, when they're hurting, we're hurting. But when they're having daily life problems, that's when it's funny. And so for me, the tone is just very much dependent on what's happening on screen. And so that's why for me, it wasn't actually that far of a reach because I knew I have to get the scripture right. It has to be authentic. It has to work. It
Yeah.
has to be true to the source material. And if I'm staying true to it, and the only thing I'm filling in are the gaps of the daily life aspects, then when I hit those big benchmarks in the Bible, it's
Hmm.
probably going to feel very real and very heart driven because usually that's what is happening in those scenes. Does that make sense?
In each episode, there's a moment of heart. There's a lot
Mhm.
of comedy shows that more or less don't have a heart. Do you think that heart is important in a comedy, or do you think that in some instances a comedy can get by without really much of a heart?
I think it depends on the premise of the show, right? Like there are definitely some comedy shows that I love that never, I mean, think about Seinfeld, right? Seinfeld
Hmm.
never had hugs and, oh, whatever. It was
Yeah.
just funny the whole time. And I love
Yeah.
that show. The perspective of that show was very much, it's trying to kind of focus in on the foibles of everyday life and how frustrating it is to get the wrong coffee order or, whatever it is. The focus is a
Yeah.
little bit different, right? I think it
Right.
depends on the show. And because our show show is so rooted in telling this biblical story and also trying to relate to these people who are very faith driven. I think naturally, I know in my life as a believer, like there are definitely days where I have hardship, and there are days where it's like tough and it's hard to get through. And I think when the focus is on trying to relate to people like this, it naturally lends itself to having those heart moments. And I do think that having moments of kind of heartfelt sincerity makes the comedy funnier because you
Mhm.
can kind of see a difference between like what it feels like when when it does hurt and when it is a low moment
Hmm.
versus when it's a low moment but it's funny. Does that kind of make sense? It's like
Yeah.
I don't know. I think the heart makes the comedy funnier, and I think the comedy makes the heart more meaningful.
Mm.
And it just makes it a more well-rounded show. Some of my other favorite comedies, I think, do that. Even The Office kind of did that sometimes.
Mhm.
You think about when Pam had her art show, and like no one showed up, but then Michael Scott shows up and he's trying to buy
Yeah.
them. It's like you can't watch that scene and not cry.
Yep.
And it's just a moment, but those moments mean everything when you're watching a show that's mostly funny.
Right.
Yeah.
What were some of the hardest scenes to either adapt or just write in this first season? Like, it was like, holy,
Mm.
how am I going to do this? How am I going to make this funny?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, easily the hardest one to do was the golden calf. When we get to the golden calf in our show, I knew that I wanted it to be serious because, again, there's not a lot of room for that to be funny in the Bible. It's a moment that hurts for Moses, it hurts for Aaron, it hurts for everybody who is involved in that. It's funny at times leading up to that, right? Like before Moses arrives, and it's the whole process of making this, and everyone is participating in it. There's certainly some humor in there, but once everything kind of hits the fan and you realize what these people have done, I knew it was going to be a serious moment, but it's really hard to figure out how serious for this show. Because in the Bible, what happens is they have the golden calf, and Moses says, "Okay, we're going to go and we're going to kill everyone who was involved in this." And he and
Yeah.
the people from Levi, the Levites, they all get their swords and they go through the camp and they kill like 3,000 people. And then everyone gets a plague. And Moses also like made the people drink the idol. It's a very brutal kind of story in terms of just a little bit like the wrath of Moses in that moment, justifiable wrath, but
Right.
still it's hard. And I was like, I don't know that I can go that hard in this show and come back from it. I can be serious, but I can't be, let's go through the camp and kill
Right.
people serious, right? So for me, that story was a really tough one to figure out. How do we show enough without tipping over into a place that we can't come back from as a mostly lighthearted show?
Yeah.
That was a real challenging one for me. A second example would be some stories are so microscopic that they don't work to have a whole episode about them, but I still
Mm.
want to do them. And so it's like, okay, how do I sneak this into this episode, but not
Hmm.
dwell on it and make it the focus of a plot line? You know what I mean? Because I
Right.
still want to do them, but I was like, okay, how do we do this? I don't have maybe a specific example for that, but just small things, right? Like when they say that the people brought too much for the tabernacle, and so they had to make an announcement like, hey, don't bring any more. I was trying to see if
Mm.
there was something funny that I could really nestle in on that and maybe do a longer stretch of a bit. I had this idea of like, oh, they're like enforcing no one can give anymore, and it was like a whole thing, which was very funny, but I tried it and it just got so in the way of everything else that was going
Mm.
on that it's like, all right, this can be part of a montage and we can just move on. So decisions like that can be challenging.
You said that the first season is going to go over Exodus. So I'm assuming that means the Ten Commandments because he comes down. Are we going to be following Moses as he gets the Ten Commandments, or is it we're going to go with the POV of the tribe and like, wow, man, he's off somewhere. I don't, is he dead? Or we,
Right. A big part of this, of another internal rule, when we're talking about the rules of the show, is that I never have the documentary crew go somewhere that they can't go.
Mm.
And so when Moses goes up on the mountain, it's just Moses and Joshua, right? So I can't follow them because otherwise that breaks the whole idea of it just being Moses and Joshua who go. Same with
Yeah.
like the documentary crew can never see the Holy of Holies because they never be
Mhm.
permitted inside the inner tent of the tabernacle. So that's kind of where we sort of draw lines of what we can show and whatnot.